Welcome to In Her Voice. My name is Kelly Covert, and I am passionate about helping women live authentically by listening to their inner voice. Get ready to be inspired by women of all walks of life that have set aside their should-bes and not good enoughs and are standing in their true voice, the voice of wisdom that each and every one of us has inside. Hello, everyone. This is Kelly, and you are listening to In Her Voice. Thank you so much for being with me today. I have a super fun and interesting interview set up with my good friend, Lori Crawford. We are talking all about human design. And if you don't know what human design is, that's okay, because you're going to learn. But I encourage you to actually, before the interview begins, to pause and go to this website. I will put the link in the show notes as well. Where did it go? I lost it. humandesignamerica.com/chart. And if you know the exact time of your birth, which you'll need to know to get your human design chart, you can input it all in, and then it will spit out your chart. If you don't know all of that, you can still look at the chart that's there on the page so you kind of know what we're talking about as we go through. I'm a very visual person, and I found that to be super helpful to me just in understanding what we're talking about. I had my chart in front of me while we were doing this. So definitely take a moment to pause and then go do that and then come back. Now let me tell you a little bit about Lori. Lori Robin Crawford is an embodiment guide. After years of working in the nonprofit world, she knew that blanket approaches to wellness were falling short of meeting people's actual needs. After asking herself what she was going to do with this insight, she knew she had to create something new. So she mashed her academic background in human security and sociology, her lived experience of feeling like life was always happening to her, and her joy for improvisational comedy together, and began improviding, an alternative wellness business striving to provide life revitalization through applied improvisation as a lens for reimagining life as we know and experience. Lori holds playful and expansive spaces while equipping folks with personalized pathways towards self-acceptance, easeful living, and a greater sense of who they truly are underneath the layers life has given them. From applied improvisation to human design, energy work to oracle cards, she loves guiding folks who have a deep curiosity of how their life might be beyond the mundane, back to their inner youthfulness as they embody and live their magic along the way. You are going to fall in love with Lori. She is so fun and so fascinating. And as is our topic of human design, I really hope that you will dig in. So let's get going with Lori. Lori Robin, welcome to In Her Voice. I'm so glad to have you here today.
Thank you so much, Kelly.
You're welcome. And we feel like we've already had enough of good, juicy things in the pre-chat they were having to have a whole other podcast. So, you just may become a regular here on In Her Voice.
Well, I now know how to use my microphone, so I can show up for that.
Fantastic. But today our focus is going to be on human design. And you are an expert on human design and sat down with me because I know a teeny tiny bit about it, and you sort of opened my eyes to new things about what it means. And I'm imagining that there might be a lot of people listening to this today who have never even heard of human design and have no idea of what we're talking about. So we're going to go super basic and really do an overview of what it is and how you can use it to connect more deeply with your own intuition and inner voice. So let's start at the very beginning. What is human design?
Sure. So human design, I like to think of it as a blueprint of how you were before life lifed. So it gives you this really nuanced, energetic profile of who you were born to be. And from that place, you then can discover and reclaim how your energy was when you were first born. And from that place, it really then becomes transformational because you're able to see how life has impacted you. You're able to see how you're carrying certain burdens or stories that you've accumulated through life that are really disconnecting you from who you actually are. And how human design does this is it blends several ancient cosmologies. So it uses the I Ching, Kabbalah, astrology, and a few other modalities to give you a unique blueprint that's uniquely yours. So no one else will have your human design. And so suddenly it gives you a way to identify what energy is yours, what energy isn't yours, and then ways to realign with that. So you're living in your fullest expression, and suddenly you're having the most ease-filled life you can have because you're not juggling all these balls that aren't yours to juggle.
Mm-hmm. I love that. So how do you know, well, I'm trying to think, what is the order we should do this in? So what's the starting point for human design?
Sure. So as far as access, the one barrier is that you do need to have your birth time, date, and location. There are ways to play around and create a sample chart if you're not sure of the exact time, but the course of several minutes difference can create a different chart. So as long as you have that information, you could simply Google human design, and it's usually the first link that comes up that takes you to the Jovian website, and that's where you can create your chart. And I will just caution those who go down this really fun wormhole that when you pull up your chart, it doesn't really look like anything you can understand. And that's where someone who has experience reading charts and providing you an embodied experience with your chart can come in handy. Otherwise, it can seem like a pretty big learning gap.
For sure. And I will say that this was my experience. Like someone was like, well, what are you in human design? I was like, I don't know. So I went and I put my information in, and then, it tells me all of these things. Like I'm a manifesting generator. Don't know what that means. My signature is satisfaction. Have no idea what that means. So let's go into these things. So there are, if I'm correct, 4 types, if you will. Why don't we start with that?
Sure. So original old school human design looks at 4 types, but modernly there's 5 types, and I'll explain where that division comes from.
Great.
So I like to think of a beach landscape for my example of how this works. And so we're going on a journey, everybody. So if you've ever been to the beach or seen a beach, we're first going to look at the ocean. And the ocean, we know, is the majority of Earth's surface. And so the water represents those manifesting generators and generators. These are the beings, the humans, who have a defined sacral center. They have consistent access to life energy. So they make 70% of the population. The depths of the oceans are the generators. They can sustain work that really lights them up. And since most of that population on Earth has that energy, everybody's really feeling that drive to work, work, work. As we get closer to the shore, we then have manifesting generators, and they have a defined throat, which means that they can more clearly manifest or speak with the universe. So they're the waves actually carving the shoreline, creating different landscapes because they have a way to change the environment around them with less resistance. And if we think of sand, it's really soft, so it gives way to that manifestation power. Then when we look, we have this huge mountain because we're somewhere maybe volcanic on this island. Those mountains are the manifestors, and they're about 9% of the population. And if we think about mountains, they're really hard to move if they ever move. And these beings are the ones who have the least energetic resistance to initiating. Their role is to initiate new things on Earth, and they provide the overarching vision for the rest of the energy types to then access what energy is there for their role. And what's that? We hear a seagull. Those seagulls flying around are reflectors. They're 1% of the population. They won't have any defined centers. So they have a really different experience, and they're here to really be the observers. They're almost like our litmus testers. They let us know what they're observing, what the state of humanity is, and then they let us have an opportunity to ask these questions of, so what are we going to do about this? And then the remaining about 20% of the population are projectors. And I like to think of projectors as the lighthouses. I'm also a projector myself. I'm a mental projector, which means that I only have my mind and ajna defined, and the rest of my centers are open. And so that lighthouse, as that light strobes by, it's guiding people to shore. It's able to sample people's energy, because projectors' energy aura is very penetrative in the sense that people notice when we walk in a room, because our energy is already sampling the energy around us, because we're looking for something to guide.
Okay. So we have generators and manifesting generators, manifestors, reflectors, and projectors.
Correct. And so that split into 5 is because now there's that distinction between generators and manifesting generators.
Got it. And my question is, you mentioned this a couple of times, the idea of having a defined center. Can you tell us what that means?
Certainly. So when you look at a human design chart, there's 9 energy centers. They're the mind, ajna, throat, G center, ego or heart center, solar plexus, spleen, root. And from these centers, you're able to see whether you have, that image will be colored in, which means you have defined centers, and that's access to that type of energy. That is something you will always have, and it's very consistent in your body. And if you have centers that are undefined, that is where you're sampling energy of those around you who have that corresponding center defined. So we accumulate wisdom through our open centers, and we offer a consistent access to energy from our defined centers.
So this is so cool, because what I hear you saying is, like, we're all showing up with some centers defined and some centers open, and we learn and process, if you will, with the open center, and we give and share wisdom with our defined center. Is that right?
Yes. Another way that I like to think of it as our defined centers is what kind of student we are, so the energy we have access to and learning, and then what we're actually here to learn are those open centers.
Ooh, this is so good. And I would suggest to those of you who are listening to pause right now and go to the website that Lori mentioned. If you just Google human design, she said it will most likely be the first one. Put in your birth information if you have all of that, and print out your chart, because I think what I would love to do is to go through, can we go through each of the centers so people can look on their chart with us?
Certainly. Yes.
So I have mine in front of me. I think this is so fascinating. So let's start at the top. If you're looking at it, there's like a column that goes down the center, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 columns down the center, and then 3 others that are off to the sides. So let's go down the center first, starting at the top.
All right, at the top. So the top is going to be the head or mind. And that center on mine is defined. And so when that center is defined, that means that I have consistent access to inspiration. The things that I share often inspire people. And that also is the place where like thoughts and exploration really happen. And so I'm able to give out things that are inspiring, and someone with that center open would be able to magnify that inspiration. So I always think of this with my husband. He has an open mind center, or head center, and I'll say something funny, and then he yes-ands the mess out of it and makes it so funny that I'm crying tears. And that's one of my favorite ways our energy plays together. Now our Ajna center, the second downward facing triangle, is where we actually conceptualize or package things to make sense of them. So our ajna is, if it's defined, we tend to have a consistent way that we like to experience information and then file it in our system, so to speak. Whereas someone with that undefined would be able to actually cultivate the sort of arrangement of experiences and processes that they feel works best for the given information. And so they're able to, that saying, think outside of the box, that could apply to these types of packagers, so to speak. The next center...
Well, and before you go on, I think what I want to point out with this is to say that neither one, like when you explain open and defined and what the open can do and what the defined can do, neither one is better.
Exactly.
Like we need all of it, right?
And that's such a great piece. And the whole premise of human design is that I think of it as we are all this beautiful cosmic tapestry, and everyone has their own threads. And there's this way that this mosaic comes together where everyone is contributing their own essence or being simply by existing as their authentic selves. And so it really is this harmonious dance. So like I shared with my husband and I, we're able to connect the ways that our undefined and defined centers interact and mingle together.
Mm-hmm.
Cool, so it really is about noticing what people you feel great around, perhaps the ones that not so much, and getting really curious to see how these layers are interacting. Because the centers that are open are the ones that we are most likely to have conditioning from societal norms, labels, life experiences. So with 7 open centers, I have a lot of deconditioning that I'm really constantly doing, because I'm going to always be experiencing conditioning because I'm experiencing life on a daily basis.
Yeah. Oh, this is so cool. I'm like so jazzed about this right now. Okay, so going down to the third one in the column, which is a square.
Yes, this will be a square. This is the throat center. And so this is where manifestation happens. And what I mean by manifestation is really how we communicate with the universe. And so this is really where we're able to express out our inner realities, because this is the one center where the energy leaves our body quite physically. You know, as I'm speaking now, that energy is leaving the body. So I have this center open, which means that sometimes I can get really excited if someone around me has that defined, and I might be over speaking and not realizing I'm cutting people off because I'm just so excited to have access to this energy. And also our voices will change if we have that open center. So we'll be able to have a different voice if we're telling stories to our friends versus if we're in a very strict professional meeting. So we'll have a lot of fluctuation in how we express, because that our energy is meeting the needs of those listeners around us. And if you have that center defined, you have a very consistent, reliable way you express. So you might often be told that your voice is really alluring or soothing, or that people enjoy hearing you speak, because they know that there's this consistent way that they'll be able to receive your messages. And if you have this defined, that means that you also have less resistance when manifesting or calling things into being, because you have a very consistent frequency in which you're speaking to the universe, and they're automatically like, oh, this is Josie. I know that from the sound of her voice.
I love that so much. So I think this is really interesting because I am defined in this area, and people tell me that all the time about my voice. Like, oh, I just love your voice so much. It's so peaceful. It's so relaxing. And I also think it's super interesting that one of my favorite things to do is podcast.
Yes. And to add a layer there, to make that even more nuanced, you have the access to energy to consistently have your podcast because that's defined. If you had that undefined, you would find some weeks it would probably be more challenging to show up and have it feel like you can express yourself clearly.
This is it's so fascinating. And one of the things that I picked up on that you said about when it's open is that you can take the energy, or like you can use the energy of someone in the room that has that defined throat. I think that's really cool too. So we're sharing this back and forth.
Definitely. And so with this open throat, my experience right now is that if you had a need, for example, I could advocate because I'm able to experience your energy in my throat and then be able to dial into what a deeper need is for your expression.
Oh, so cool. Okay, let's keep going.
All right. So below that, it'll be, you could either look at it as a sideways square. And so that would be the identity center. And this is really where this idea of love is coming from. And so it really is whether you feel like you are connected to your identity, you have this innate self-love. And so I have this center open, and so I have had many times in life where I'm asking myself, who am I? Why does everyone else seem to know who they are? And so it really can oftentimes, through conditioning, equate to worth. And so this energy, though, has this, when it's undefined or open, you really have this ability to have connections with people from multiple backgrounds because you're able to have this sense of identity that's actually about relating with other people and their identity. And so it might be easier to have a multicultural experience without judgment and to actually enjoy what you're interacting with in other people if the center is undefined. And that doesn't mean if it's defined you don't have access to that, but there's a certain way where your identity comes in the room first, and then you're able to see where you're able to meet other people. And then with people with this energy defined, they're able to inspire people with that open to, like, you can have an identity, explore what that is. And so if you have a relative that, you know, might be the quirky aunt that everyone's sort of like, well, what is her deal? But she's so sure of self and she fully claims herself, that can be really inspiring to say if she has a niece or a nephew with that open, because they're able to see, oh, Aunt Mary has always been Aunt Mary. I wonder what it would be like if I was always myself.
I love that. And we all know people like that.
Certainly.
Yeah. Okay, good. Let's keep going.
And so you wanted to go down. So then down the line would be the sacral center. So that's going to be the next square. And the sacral center is what generators and manifesting generators have defined. And again, that's 70% of the population. So most people have that defined. And so this is our life force energy. This is really the energy to sustain effort and work. And while manifesting generators and generators can sustain work, they can still burn out if we're not tapping into when we've done enough. And so it's really important, if you see on your chart that you're a manifestor, generator, or generator, that you are doing what lights you up. Because if you're doing things just because they're expected, you will also end up running out of this energy.
I have a feeling that a lot of perfectionists are defined in this area, because I know I am. And it reminds me of just like this idea of like, well, I can do more, so I will do more. Instead of, you know, just because you can doesn't mean you should.
Yeah, and that's actually the tagline I would give to open sacrals, because if we're around someone with that defined, we are amplifying. So anything that's open amplifies, like a Bluetooth speaker, the energy that's defined around us in that center. So then we'll suddenly have this false sense of, I have all the energy in the world, look at me, and then we can't actually sustain it. So we might work really diligently for a few hours and then wonder why we're so exhausted. And so this is really one of the more nuanced, beautiful ways of really knowing your chart and then seeing it as something that it's actually just a visualization of you. So once you can embody yourself, you understand those different limits. So that way you're able to show up the ways you want to, instead of wondering, you know, like, what has happened? It's been 10 years and now, you know, we can really lose track as we're floating through, because we're always in collective energies to some extent.
Yeah, so fascinating. Okay, should we keep going down?
That's fine, yeah.
Okay,
It's
sure.
your podcast. Yeah, so the next is your root center. And so this is really about security, stability. And it's also your connection to like time and what's really happening around you. And so if you have your root defined, you're more likely to have a real good understanding of just like when you've done enough, when you're feeling nourished, when you're feeling sustained. And so you're more likely to feel grounded and in touch with time. And so you know, today is Tuesday because yesterday was Monday, and you don't even have to think. Your body just knows how it's progressing. And so what you offer is really this way to connect and ground into like, what is the body experiencing? And for those of us who have this undefined, like myself, I'm like, how is it October 13th? What's happening? It was just January. You know, we're more likely to not understand time because we don't relate to it in terms of what is our stability. And we're also more likely to do more than we should, energetic-wise, because we are likely to miss our body's cues of when we've done enough. So perfect example, I was up till 2 a.m. last night because I was reading something interesting and didn't realize it was 2 a.m. because I was so into the energy of what I was reading that I was missing all of my you're tired cues.
Mm-hmm. And you know, this is a good time to ask this question. And that is, I feel like we can also, I don't know what the word is, but like we can get to a place where we have unlearned that ability.
Yes,
right?
Definitely.
Because I know I see that in myself where, you know, I have stopped at times in my life paying attention to how my body feels in the space and to how time is passing. Like, and almost like I've forced myself to ignore it. And I think if you do that enough, you can forget what it's like to feel grounded, to feel it, you know, in your body.
Yes, I'm smiling so cheesily big. I'm so glad you mentioned that because that's really the approach I take to my work is how can we acknowledge the systems around us that we live in and their impact on us, including that conditioning of how we're expected to disassociate from our body's wisdom? And then how can we find creative ways to shift our relationship so suddenly then we can re-alive in our ability to listen to those inner voices? Because what happens is each of these centers has a certain way it communicates with us. And if we are doing our best to survive in the world, which most of us really that's a phase we've been in life, we don't have access to the energy it takes to listen. And so our energy centers go dormant, so to speak. They're realizing that, oh, you know what, Lori doesn't have capacity to hear me, so I'm not going to keep shouting. I'm just going to sit here and paint my nails, so to speak. You know, they find ways to just be there, but at the same time, it's a part of our being. They're so ready to re-enter this conversation, but that's where it has to become a conversation. We have to suddenly realize that we don't need to think everything through. So that's one thing I do want to mention, is that even as a mental projector, I'm not even supposed to think through my decision. No one is, because the mind is where we experience life and take in information, but we all have a certain one of our system, our centers in our system, or a process that we get our inner wisdom out, and that's something called authority, and that's how we best make our decisions.
Ooh. Oh, Lori, this is so good because like I feel like what you're saying, what I hear you saying is this. Listen to your inner voice and trust yourself.
Yes.
And I mean, that's what this podcast is all about. And I feel like this is just another tool. Doesn't mean, I think when you see it like that, I have to be this one way. There's lots of ways to show up in this, but this is a tool that we can use to come back to our body and come back to that wisdom that is in there already.
Yes, definitely. And my practice and belief is really about being multimodal and really having everything we have access to as a resource or a tool in our toolkit. And so what human design offers, one of the things is knowing what your specific authority is, which would be your unique decision-making process, because that's the voice that we should be tuning into the most. The rest of our systems will have a voice that they're sharing dependent on whether they're picking up energy from outside or whether they might be feeling what's called a not self theme of really being perhaps in a circle of doubt or in a place of surviving and fear coming up. And all of those voices are valid because they're communicating with us. But in terms of making decision and knowing which voice we should allow to be the loudest, there is a unique authority that each of us will have.
Okay, good. We're going to put a pin in that. We're going to come back to
Yes.
that. Okay, so let's go to, if I'm looking at my chart, to the left-hand side, there's a triangle.
Yes, so that is the spleen. And spleen really governs your health, your wellness, and that survival instinct. So if you have that center defined, then you're going to have consistent access to like this type of intuitive energy that will let you know in a split second if something is for you or not, if something is risky or not. And so you're able to then also have a way to understand fear because it's going to be something that you likely have a strong relationship with at some point in your life. Whereas when that center is open or undefined, you're actually sometimes feeling fear, but you don't realize it's not yours. And so again, we're amplifying that energy around us if we have the center open. And also with open spleens, the way that we would then get intuitive insights will be different. And it really depends on that relationship we have there. And so I know for one, I have that completely open, which means I have none of the colored gates, which are those numbers, defined. And so I even had to stop watching scary movies before I even knew about human design because I realized that I didn't know that clearing out an energy center was a thing. So I wasn't aware that I could let go of that fear energy I feel from those scary movies. Mm-hmm. Whereas someone with that defined probably loves horror movies because they understand that fear is just something that exists in a moment.
Yeah, I'm not a scary movie fan either. My husband loves them. Like he could watch them every day. And I just don't like how they make me feel.
Yeah. And again, there's this visceral, like inner body feeling that we can get with any center that's undefined if something is like emoting or sharing that type of energy, because it may overwhelm our systems because we haven't already cleared out the day-to-day residual energy we have in that center.
Oh, yeah. It's so fascinating. Okay, and so then moving straight across to the right, there's
yes,
a triangle.
The solar plexus. So that's the center for emotions. And really, I think of it as connectivity. And so I also have that fully open. So for me, I had to realize that people always told me that I'm too emotional. And so I would have thought that meant I'd had that center defined. But because open centers amplify energy around them, what was happening is all of my family has defined emotion centers. So throughout childhood, they would have a certain emotional reaction and I would be amplifying it. So then suddenly I seemed like the one that was emotional. And so if you have that center open or undefined, it's really important to start experimenting with, does this emotion actually feel like it's mine? Is this something I'm seeing someone else model or experience and then I'm just having this secondhand experience? Because with this open, we're able to get wise and guide people, of course with their consent, through their emotional process, or really learn how to hold space, because we're sampling the broadest range of emotions possible because we're feeling everyone's emotions. And then if you have this center defined, you're going to have a very consistent way that you experience your emotion. So it's called an emotional wave. And so my husband has this this defined, and it's his authority. So his emotional wave can last 2 to 3 days. And what that means is when something prompts a strong reaction from him, he's experiencing it at that intensity level, sometimes for days. So I've learned that it's best to give him more space so that way I'm not amplifying it, because then it can suddenly feel even more overwhelming.
Okay. And then the last one where we move up into the center just a little bit, and there's sort of like a smaller triangle there.
Yes, a smaller triangle. So that's the heart or ego center. And this is really, think of this as it's willpower, and it's really Do you have like a innate sense of drive that's connected to something that feels unshakable, so to speak? So if you have a defined heart, ego, or will center, all three of those names are used. But if you have that defined, you can ask yourself, do I have a will for this? Does it feel like I actually want to do this? And that prompts how you go through with certain things. And you'll also then be able to have that be what guides your energy or decisions throughout the day. And so that really amplifies, or that shares out to others this idea that, like the saying, if there's a will, there's a way, that only applies to people if they have this center defined. So the rest of us who have that opened, and I have this completely open again with no defined gates, which means I don't have any consistent energy activated in this center, that saying doesn't apply to me. Because what is willpower? What? If I'm around someone who has that defined, sure, I feel a little boost. But what then happens when we have this open or undefined is we're able to actually have a different relationship with driving forces behind things, where we're able to really sort of like check what our subjective motivations are for things in a way, because we'll have to really get to a granular level to find something that then activates something within us to want to do anything. But it's also a place where we really can open up to this broad way of interacting with people and experiencing each other. And so, I've always been told I have a really open heart, or a really big heart, and now I know it's literally because I have a fully open heart. And so I just have this way of holding tenderness for people and beings, regardless of whether I know you or not, because there's just a level of empathy that can come from this center, because we've likely experienced that lack of willpower. So it can often feel like we're kind of floating around looking for ways to connect, to feel that sort of anchoring, or like that drive to then be involved in something.
Yeah. I'm also open, not completely so, but mostly so in this one. And I feel that way too. But I think the gift of that, like you said, is when you are super clear on the desire, you find the motivation.
Yes. I think of this one as a sieve almost. Like we just have to get some of the other things to the side so we can really focus on what it is that we're feeling called to.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, that's a beautiful visual for that. Okay. So I do want to just touch briefly on this idea of the authority, because that I think is really important too. So can you give us an overview of that?
Yes. So it really is our literal inner voice, which is such a beautiful synchronicity to this whole conversation in your podcast. So I'll again go from top to bottom. And so if you are a mental projector, you have your mind, ajna, and or throat. Only though any combination of those top three centers defined, you'll have nothing defined from the throat, below the throat. And so if you're a mental projector like I am, we're the only type of authority that has something that's actually not in our body. Because if we're not supposed to think things through, because that energy gets confused and it's not a place that we can have clear decisions, we have to do something called soundboard. So we have to actually speak out and get our inner world outside of us so that we can have a relationship with it. We listen to how our voice sounds. If we're doing a video recording of ourselves, we can see how our posture changes. Do we sound excited? Are there certain words that we're using a lot that sound like they are maybe like dread-based words or excitement-based words? I created something called journey doodling, where I draw out landscapes of what's inside of me to create a place to relate with myself, and then I'll come to my clarity and my decisions from storyboarding out, almost like a comic strip, what my decisions are. And the key here is, if you end up finding out you're a mental projector or you have one in your life, when we're doing this, we're not looking for advice. We're looking to actually throw our energy against the energy of who's holding space for us. So then what we get back is a reflection of what we're saying. There might be times where we ask for advice, but the intention is to actually just get our world out of ourselves so then we can actually see how we're feeling about things.
I love this. And I'll just say, side note, as a coach, that's a good tool for everyone. I think like just having someone reflect back to you the things that you're saying, because then it makes it easier to hear what your inner voice is saying to you. And that's something that I use often in my coaching.
Definitely. And one other layer there is that in my experience for mental projecting, once I'll get to clarity, because I'll start to feel what I call transformer moments, where the rest of the energy centers in my body start clicking, or my ears will start popping. And so I'll literally feel an energetic recalibration, and I'll know it's like an arrival. It's like a remembrance coming through of, this is how I feel, this is my decision, this is what's best for me in this moment. And so each of the other authorities will go through, have that ability to recalibrate and feel and let that voice come through as you're holding space that way as a coach, of allowing people to have that space be held. So that's really great that you're doing that. So 86 brownie points for you today.
Oh, well, that's a bonus. Okay, so what's the next authority?
Yeah, so I'll go ahead and speak on reflectors. So reflectors won't have any of these centers defined, and so their strategy is to wait a full lunar cycle. And so that really then becomes their authority, is after waiting this month-long process, and that's so they can sample all of the energies around them, then they come to these decisions. And authorities are really used, they can be used for day-to-day decisions, but they should always be used for the big four: moving, relationships, work, and anything that drastically changes the energetic environment you'll be in, because that can impact your health. So they have a totally different experience, and they're really here to be the true connoisseurs of patience.
No kidding. That must require cultivation of much patience.
Definitely, especially in a world that tells you to make a choice right away or to think it through. Like, those types of sayings don't apply. So it's really difficult.
Interesting. Yeah. Okay.
And so the next, if you have, like, your authority is going to be like your identity center. Again, that's going to be, how are you really feeling your identity is impacted by this decision? Is this something that upholds your values, or is this something that contradicts them? And so it really is this returning to self and allowing that to speak very clearly of, like, this affirms how we want to go through our life, or this is not affirming how we want to uphold ourselves through life. Mm-hmm. And so you can be, and so that would be like self-projected authority, which is really then like a lot of self-projected, like to soundboard as well, but they literally want to marvel at themselves, so that they really enjoy watching them play back and be like, oh, I'm so wise, and they get really amped up by just seeing their full expression. So they really are self-projected in that way of, like, they motivate themselves. These are the people who literally are getting up in the morning so jazzed the more that they're embodying themselves. And so these might be your, like, really early rising morning people once they get into a flow of being jazzed by themselves, because as soon as they start getting in that daily routine of being them, their energy just continually renews in that way.
Oh, that's so interesting. Because I feel like I look at people who are like that and I wonder, like, what is
Yeah, and it could be any sort of things, but the few self-projected projectors I know have that quality where on days where they're really on, so to speak, it really is because they are feeling that connection of, I am carrying myself through this day.
Interesting.
Yeah, and so the next authority, you could be ego authority or ego-centered. And so this really, again, is, what do I have the will to do? So it is that following the things that you feel the most pulled towards. So a lot of people express feeling pulled towards something, and then like they feel a retraction from other things. And that's how they'll know if something's for them or not for them, whether they feel compelled or they want to, like, shrink back from that situation or that topic.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And then we're going to go over to the left from there to our spleen. And if you have spleen authority, you're going to be a splenic projector. And so with your spleen authority, it speaks once. And so this is one where it can be the easiest to reconnect with because it will be such a sudden decision. But if you decide to not listen to it and then the next day you're like, hey, spleen, I wanted your opinion. They're like, we already told you. I'm sorry you were too busy texting, but we aren't going to repeat ourselves. So this is the one where, because it's so related and it is that fight, flight, or freeze experience from our like very first primordial existence. And so it will speak very suddenly. And a lot of people say that they feel their no's much stronger than their yeses because the spleen's trying to keep you safe. So they'll know if something's a definite no. And then they hold a space of curiosity for anything that could be a maybe or a yes.
Okay. This is so fascinating. I'm
like
totally geeking out.
And so if we go to the middle there with that sacral, that square, these are the only people who should trust their gut. So that saying, trust your gut, it really only applies if you have sacral defined. And especially if it's your authority, because you can have your sacral defined but have a different authority, and so you'll still have a gut conversation. But as far as making decisions, you trust it and give it the highest sort of like microphone level if it's your authority. And so you literally, the best way to have this conversation is yes or no questions, because if I say to someone with sacral authority, do you want to go to the beach or to the park or to the movies? Their sacral is like, wait, which thing are we responding to? So saying, do you want to go to the beach? Okay. Do you want to go to the park? Yes. Oh, okay. We go to the park.
Gotcha. Okay.
And then over to the right, we get to the solar plexus. And again, this is that emotional wave. So if you have a defined solar plexus and you've ever made a decision while you're feeling up, because you just got exciting news, but then a few weeks into it, you're like, I actually don't like this job. It's probably because you made your decision at the height of your wave instead of letting your emotional wave finish and see what level your baseline stops at. So similar with soundboarding, since that these are the authorities that actually can take a bit of time. So really allowing yourself to advocate for yourself and say, you know what, I need to get back to you. Can I have like 2 business days? Giving yourself that time to experience your emotional wave. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to fully embrace your authority.
This is me.
Yes.
This is what mine is. And when we were talking about it the other day, I was like, oh, this makes so much sense to me now. And what I love about this is it still requires self-reflection and stillness and that daily habit of connecting with your inner voice. All of these do, really.
Yes.
In maybe a little bit of a different way or a different feeling, but we're still having to have the habit of touching inward to where our wisdom lies. And I love that. Okay, and then what's the last one?
So as far as authorities, that would be it. And so
okay.
Yeah, because so there's another center, but there's not a like root authority, so to speak.
Okay, cool.
And so the one other thing to note, though, is any way that you have combinations of things, defined, undefined, connected, or not connected, in terms of like, so my mind and Ajna are defined and they're connected because they're corresponding centers that are right after each other. All of those different nuances and complexities really change what the experience is of whether you're hearing a lot of voices, a few voices, and what your journey will be like to be able to have a relationship with each voice, but know which one's there for decision making.
And I want to emphasize again that just like any other tool, I mean, all of you who are listening know I love me some Enneagram. I love it. It is a tool for self-reflection. It is a tool for understanding, but it doesn't give you the answers. The tool doesn't give you the answers. All of those answers are still coming from within, right?
Yes. And so our human design is showing us if we have access to ourselves, because a lot of us don't, if we have access to our full selves, this is how we would be embodying that. This is what our energy would feel like. This is how we can find the most harmony with our interactions with our others. And so it really, if you have an experience with human design in the past with someone who looks at it dogmatically as this is good, this is bad, you have to do this, that to me is not inviting, and that can be really problematic. So I do want to hold space, because I have worked with some people whose first experience with human design was from someone who approaches it dogmatically, and that takes away access to choice and access to sovereignty and access to the ability to say, I see that this is here, but I don't connect with that at this point in life. And so I just want to hold space, because that can really happen, and it's another form of toxic mentorship if that is a situation that you've had.
Yeah, thank you for saying that, because I think it's so important to understand that ultimately all of our decisions come down to ourselves. Like, we are the ones who are making those decisions. We are the ones who are taking the action, regardless of what our human design is, or what our Enneagram is, or how that INFJ, Myers-Briggs, all of the things, right? So this is just another tool that you can use to understand yourself. And Lori, I just love everything that you shared. I'm so grateful to you. Why don't you tell everyone how they can connect with you, to learn more about this, and you do a lot of really cool things. So to learn more about all of the stuff that you do.
Yeah, thank you so much. I will just preface that multimodal is me. So human design is one of those tools, but I really believe my role is to give people access to a variety of tools so we can custom design what feels good for you. And so you can find more of that on Instagram at Improvide, IMPROVIDE.Lori. No, I lied. I got excited by my name. Improvide.with.Lori. So Improvide with Lori.
And we'll put a link to that.
Yes,
so
I made it this far, Kelly. I tried my best.
Well, one thing that you have to know for sure about In Her Voice is that perfection is never required.
Perfect, because I don't have that in me.
Perfect. None of us do.
Exactly.
None of us do. So Improvide with Lori.
Yes.
And I know that you are working on some wonderful things. So I just want to encourage everyone to follow Lori. And she has these wonderful Instagram TVs that she does where she talks about this stuff. It's really well worth it. I highly recommend. So, Lori, one last question to you today.
Yes.
What is your inner voice saying to you these days?
My inner voice is saying, dare to be clear. Really spend that time getting clear, and let that be the leap that you take.
Yes, I love it. Clarity is so amazing and worth the work.
Yes.
It's worth the work, because it does take some work, I think, for all of us to get to that point of clarity. So great words of wisdom from your inner voice and from you. Thank you for being here, and thank you for sharing your time with us. I hope that all of you who are listening, you were able to download your chart and kind of follow along and learn a little bit more about who you are. And if you have questions, of course, you can reach out to Lori on Instagram. So Lori, thank you so much.
Thank you, Kelly. Have a razzle-dazzle day.
You too. All right, y'all. I think that human design is so cool and so interesting and so revealing. I have really been digging into it myself to understand more about me. And, what I'm discovering is that things that I tend to judge actually are just how I am. And if I work on accepting, and not only accepting, but leaning into those, then I feel so much happier. I feel so much more joy. I'm so much more magnetic, and things just feel easier. And I'm all about finding ease in life, all about it. So to that end, I want to share something with you that actually has to do with my own human design. Like I said, I've been digging in, and I have always known that one of the things I love to do is help people with ideas. I love coming up with ideas for people. I love helping them sift through their own ideas. And I love using my own intuition, my own inner voice to do that with people. I mean, like when I am with somebody, I just have all like, it's like my brain is open and all of these things are just dropped down in for whoever I am talking with. And I've known that to be true for a long time, but I've never really, thought about it much. I just knew that I enjoyed doing that. But what was super fascinating is in a recent human design reading that I had, I discovered that one of my gateways was called the idea gateway. And that just means that ideas flow for me. And I was like, oh yeah, that's true. And I started thinking, what would it look like if I leaned into that? What would it look like if I made what feels very easy to me available to everyone? What if I sort of lent you my idea superpowers for an hour? What would that feel like? So I am experimenting with a new session that I'm calling simply the Idea Hour. And what it is, it's an hour on Zoom with me where we just dig into the ideas. And, I've been talking with people about ideas, and what I hear is there are two kinds of people who wish they had more ideas and people who feel they have too many ideas. And I think that this Idea Hour is for both kinds of people, because not only am I really spectacular at receiving the ideas, I also am really good at reflecting back. Sometimes when you have a lot of ideas, it can cause you to feel frozen. There are so many ideas you don't know where to begin. And having a sounding board, having someone who can listen and reflect back to you what you are saying in a way that you can hear can be invaluable. And that is what the Idea Hour is. It's an hour for you to sift through your own ideas, to come up with new ideas, to use my gifts as an idea channeler, so to speak, to just take your ideas to the next level. It's kind of like brainstorming on intuitive crack. And I'm super stoked about it. So if this sounds like something that you are interested in, I am doing sort of like a rollout pricing on this, and it's super reasonable. So head on over to kellycover.com/idea. And you can book yourself in for an Idea Hour with me. And I'm super excited about this. I can't wait to sit with you and to just open up my idea gateway and flow in my own gifts and have that be a benefit and a service to you. So that's kellycover.com/idea. Let me remind you, you are spectacularly made. You are unique. And we need you and your superpowers in this world. We need you because only you can do what you can do. Only you can show up fully as you. Remember this, you are worthy.